Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that provides you an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world and ask how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's August 4th, 2025. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue, how have you been?
My default answer is always excellent or great. I can't believe it's the beginning of August. This past week, I don't have much interesting banter because it was just a week where chemotherapy just had its way with me. For people going through chemo, I have a suggestion. Arnold Palmer's lemonade and iced tea are a good drink because there's enough acidity to cut through the metallic taste of chemo. There you have it.
Love a good Arnie
Anyway,
Palmy.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, what have you been up to? How are the boys?
They're good. Our oldest is about to start kindergarten next week,
Craziness.
which is like a whole life shock thing anyway. But he and his mom went school supply shopping over the weekend, and they brought back Pink Pearl magic erasers. There's not a whole lot that gives you more nostalgia for back to school than that smell of the old Pink Pearl. And I was wondering, it resonated the same for you, or if there's another smell or back to school memory that you have.
Well, number one, I loved back to school shopping. I loved getting organized. I liked new pencils, new crayons, new ruler, new compass. That's what we did when we were young because
New slide rule when you got
I
older.
was just settle down. Settle down on the slide rule. But yes, I can read a slipstick to 7 digits. I think it was just the whole thing. I also think it was going with my mom, right? And it was kind of a rite of passage. And I can't imagine how excited he is to have all that, tools to be a big boy and to go to school. So crazy. How fun. But yeah, I loved it. We also, when I was little, we had that kind of putty eraser.
Uh-huh.
That you could pull apart and it was really stringy. And then my mom banned it because I couldn't be trusted with it. So that's one of my memories too. I don't want to hear it, Susan. It was a lot of what I heard growing up.
Well, let's get to some headlines. This week in the threat picture, a Microsoft escort program exposed U.S. defense systems to Chinese engineers, raising alarms about just how far brand loyalty has outpaced national security vetting. And the Trump administration's firing at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and West Point send a chilling message. If you or your data doesn't match the political narrative, your job might be next.
What a good set. All right, let's get at it.
Before we get into this week's stories, it's time for a geopolitical gut check. So this is going to be a new segment that we're going to call a Romp Around the World. This is where we zoom out. We'll look at what's happening across the globe and why it matters to us here at home. Sue, why don't you take a few minutes, take us around the world. What are you seeing? Where should we be paying the most attention right now?
Yeah, I love this. I love romping. Let me recommend to our listeners, Eric, there's a woman named Beth Sanner, and she has a website, BETHSANNER.com. She was career intelligence analyst, one of the smartest people I know, but her job before retirement was as President Trump's intelligence briefer. She is really incredibly thoughtful on this topic. So if you want to just do some work on your own and kind of get a feel for what the experts are thinking, Beth usually has a pretty good take on it. So I'll try and do my version of it. But if you want to dive into it, I really encourage you to, because what is happening geopolitically does actually matter to us. So we'll start with Russia, Ukraine. I actually think that we may be trending in a decent direction, not necessarily in terms of outcome, but there are some actions of the Trump administration that I think at this time hack and some good things. Number one is freeing up aid to Ukraine. Two, let's not be negative about everything that happens. I think you have to look at what's happening in Europe and NATO and see that what has happened is, for myriad reasons, they have kind of rallied to the moment in terms of recognizing the role they have in their backyard and devoting more of their resources to good outcome. I think that what you're seeing, and just on a straight economic front, is the idea of Europe and NATO and other allies and partners spending money with the U.S. to actually acquire weapons and security systems that will help provide an overlay is a really good trend for us, especially as we're trying to rebuild our coffers. Having the resources and the approach to affect what seems to be a revolution in military affairs going on in terms of how warfare is changing. So you have to look at all those things and say, we might be okay. I worry a little bit that we haven't seen Russia's or Putin's push back on this. The 12 to 15 days for sanctions, it just worries me a bit. And I think in the history repeating itself category, he has proven when he's forced to choose in any tangible way, President Trump tends to ameliorate the Putin piece at the expense of the free and open societies. The reason this is really important, I cannot stress enough that this is in part a kind of battle for the soul of free and open societies in a new world order. You just can't have someone decide that they're going to come in and take a piece of land, abuse civilian populations, and let that go unchecked. And not just because you can't intellectually, but there are a lot of people that don't have the resources that we do or that are watching about whose side they're going to have to choose. So this is an important battle for the nature of the world order that we're going to have going forward. So worth watching. So that's Ukraine and Russia. Anything I missed?
I almost thought you were talking about Gaza there.
Okay, so let's move on. Israel,
Except
Gaza.
for the whole annexation piece.
Yeah.
Few parallels there.
Yeah. I'm going to actually make a different parallel with Israel, Gaza, and the early days of us fighting the war on terror. So kind of as is my want, let's bounce up and just say that post October 7th, it is hard not to say that Israel had the right to defend itself and rid itself of this horrible thing. And we'll put aside that they should have been prepared and they have no strategy, it seems, going forward. But now we're here where we are. They have responsibility for that land. I'm going to stop short of calling it genocide, but what they're allowing to happen is their responsibility. There's just no one else to do it. I suppose you could expect Hamas to capitulate, surrender, and turn and all the things. But again, now you're expecting somebody else who doesn't have the value prop that we ostensibly have, expecting them to behave entirely differently. So this is a big rub. And the United States is a bit in the crosshairs on this one because you're just feeling the tide turning in America about, come on, who are we? Right? Who are we? Like, I can have a lot of conversations about what is Israel doing, what's their strategy going forward. Is Netanyahu basically doing anything he can, weirdly, a little bit like President Trump, to avoid scrutiny on a topic he doesn't want by creating something he has? And I guess I'm glad that the United States is providing some humanitarian relief. My parallel is with the war on terror. So when we first started the war on terror, we would do whack-a-mole, right? There would be some terrorist event. We would go screaming into Iraq or to Syria or to somebody else. We would crush ISIS and then we would leave. And we left destruction behind us. We left decimated populations that became refilled with the same people we tried to extract. And they would come in and we would do it again. We created more destruction. Over time, we changed our strategy to come in, get rid of the terrorist threat, and then hold the land until some sense of normalcy could be reestablished. People could come back into it. There's some sort of society that was organic, and then move on to the next thing. So I think if I'm giving advice to Israel, I'm going to say that you're executing a strategy, if you have one, that is unlikely to work. I do think the United States is going to have to figure out where we stand. This is a really big issue generationally in America. Weirdly, it plays out in terms of what's happening on college campuses. You know, at some point, the U.S. has got to realize that it is using taxpayer-funded dollars to support someone who may or may not be executing against our values. I don't think you can minimize how important the Middle East is when it is relatively stable, and there have been times when it's relatively stable. When you have bad actors and no ability to communicate, it just tends to go badly. If I look back on the first Trump administration, I think I would probably say that they did a decent job of their Middle East policy, including the Abraham Accords that got us out of the region, which is always an irritant, and forced the region to do more work itself, which I think played dividends on October 7th. But it does matter to us. It matters to us in terms of trade and resources. So that's Gaza and Israel. Let's talk about one that is always top of mind for me, and that's Taiwan, China. The reason we talk about these things is at some point it will become a conversation about whether responding to some crisis is in America's interest. I commend to you, not just because I was a part of it, but actually because I did it with Admiral Mike Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Council of Foreign Relations report called China-Taiwan in a Time of Rising Tensions that talks about exactly what's going on there. We aren't talking about it much, but Xi has made it very clear that he intends to reintegrate Taiwan, either peaceably or forcefully, into one entity. Taiwan is a free and open society. They are one of the great democracies. They're one of the great free trade enterprises. They're hugely important internationally. They're important to us in terms of chip manufacturing. And like Ukraine, you just can't be having democracies being picked off by people that want it. What makes this challenging is U.S. policy toward China-Taiwan is still stated as a one-China policy of strategic ambiguity. We don't like it, but we're not going to insert ourselves into it. But let's be clear about China is doing the boiling frog of more and more demonstrations that cross over into coercion in terms of the military exercises they're having in the Taiwan Strait, their actions in the South China Sea, demonstrating their intention. Man, it is a big problem if it turns violent. And if we decide to engage, there are estimates of trillions of dollars of economic impact on the global economy. And if you think about the pandemic, when we couldn't get chips for rockets, this is going to be a world where you can't get a washing machine. And so it is an interest, not just in Sue world of got to maintain the free and open societies, but real tangible benefit. And the reason I'm bouncing it up to you is Xi is under incredible pressure in China. His economy isn't going well. He hasn't been seen as much in public as he used to be. There's some suggestion that he has rivals exerting their will. And one of the things that we have always cited is that when he feels pressure, and again, kind of like Putin, kind of like President Trump, kind of like Netanyahu, when he feels pressure, he's going to look to an action that's going to relieve some of that pressure. And so there is a school of thought that says, as pressure on him ramps up, the likelihood that he will choose that moment to inspire nationalism in China to take some action against Taiwan could happen. So just worth putting on your radar because the effects of what happens there are so profound economically, not just militarily.
That's really interesting with Xi, especially if he feels backed into a corner, right? Because any crisis domestically gets overshadowed by a national event, right? If you ask me before, would we go to Taiwan's aid because they're our ally, I'd point to our withdrawal in Afghanistan and our limited support to Ukraine as, hey, maybe we're not the ally and consistent partner that we used to be or we claim to be. But TSMC, I think, is a much bigger variable. Taiwan Semiconductor. They make the majority of the chips. So I think that creates another wrinkle and element.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know the way this shakes out. When we talk later about kind of what's happening with the professional cadre, these are big issues that have to be worked on. China is so not anybody else. We are so intertwined economically. Taiwan is a different kind of issue that takes different kinds of thoughtfulness to address.
Briefly before we move on, I 1,000% think Israel should have gone after Hamas and those assholes. But at
Yeah.
this point, they're kind of being the assholes and need to treat those people with more respect. If you think that Hamas is just going to turn over or start negotiating, all they want is death and destruction. That's terrorism, right? You need to go back into Palestine and win some hearts and minds, right? With the
Yeah.
population, because those are still your citizens.
Yeah, you and I see it exactly the same way. And you have a responsibility. It might even be Geneva Convention-y, right? If you're controlling the land, you have the responsibility for the people on the land. And I totally agree on their original righteousness in their response. But this is a different moment. And Hamas isn't going to be different than Hamas is.
Terrorists go down to the last man, right? They just want to strike fear and death and destruction. So put two in their heart, put one in their mind, and then rebuild.
The quotable Eric Kep. I love it.
So our first headline is China cyber hacking. So new investigation has
Yay! Talking
revealed that
cyber.
Microsoft relied on China-based engineers to instruct U.S. digital escorts working on Department of Defense systems, an arrangement that may have exposed sensitive national security data to exploitation by Chinese-affiliated hackers. This setup undermines the core of the U.S. government's zero trust cybersecurity model. So what is zero trust? Basically means never trust and always verify. Defined by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, it's an evolving set of cybersecurity paradigms that eliminates implicit trust in any user. And it's got a few basic principles, such as no implicit trust, meaning all entities are considered untrusted until you verify them. There's least privileged access, so grant only the minimal access required for each request. And then contextual risk-based access decisions, evaluate identified device posture, location, behavior, etc. And so I think this third principle kind of resonates most with this article. Digital escorts are not AI prostitution thing, but instead somebody that's working with foreign engineers and software developers on a DoD project. Many people from the ProPublica article we read, Sue, didn't even know that this system was in place by Microsoft in the DoD, which is a little concerning. What are your thoughts on zero trust and some of these China-based engineers, even if they're being escorted, working on DoD systems?
First, a good offense will always beat a good defense, right? So if we aren't constantly evolving, like I have in my head a place where we are playing a continuous game of cat and mouse, best offense against best defense. You can cycle faster than naturally occurs. And so maybe like in basketball, our defense can beat our adversaries to the spot. What is going on in the digital space is not a nice to have. It is the modern instantiation of national interests that are pervasive. And if they must, I mean, I described one imperative, which was outcompete us, but there's also information theft, destruction, placement of all sorts of things. They will continue to find a way. Gosh, I wish peace would break out and that everyone was a good guy. Everyone thinks they're the good guys, but I can assure you that those who would do us harm, we just can't be complacent. There are really good things about the large companies in terms of how much reach they have, what they can do when they upgrade products, just lots of really good things about them. But I think there's also sometimes a false sense of security that nothing bad can happen because they'll catch everything that happens. So those are two. But here's the most important one. This is from your Aunt Sue, who used to do cyber operations. Most of the time, much of the time, digital attack is paired with a human to help it beat things like zero trust. So I'm all over zero trust. I think we've made it better. It's in the right direction. But missing the counterintelligence part that involves humans, it's a classic blunder. Second only to don't fight a land war in Asia, Princess Bride illusion. We are still constantly surprised at the ways our adversaries and competitors are attacking us. I'm really excited by what's happening in the commercial cyber intelligence, counterintelligence field, because the commercial field is at the volumes that you can look at nefarious activity rather than the more manual pieces that you have coming on. So I think it's a real problem. Interests will be advanced, and humans continue to be the best way into our systems, not just a technical approach.
The escort system is not new. There's
Mm-mm.
been from foreign bases having people without a clearance come in to clean or do administrative things or even doing some work, but you always have a DoD representative with them to make sure that they aren't accessing physical, restricting them from physical access to things or even getting on a computer.
Yeah.
And the idea was to translate this over to the cloud. And you had these escorts that were, turns out, a little less trained, didn't necessarily know about the code, didn't know what they were working on, and opens up to additional risk. And the counter from the private sector would be, well, okay, if you wanted us to use all US
Yeah.
programmers or our US coders, the cost would have been exorbitant. Like you wouldn't be able to pay it. So there's a trade-off there. The transparency though, and the communication and the access, because when you're walking with a physical person and you're observing them doing work, much easier to identify that they're doing something nefarious or they're trying to sneak away from you. But when you're in the cloud or in the digital space, you don't know what that person's doing. There's a lot more opportunity for them to take advantage of that situation.
Yeah, the volumetric problem is massive, which is why, as excited I am about our new AI action plan, I worry when it outstrips the thoughtful application of security. It's intellectually a fine model of security escort, which, by the way, Eric, in 1980, I also was a security escort at night, escorting people who didn't have security clearances into controlled spaces, and I would watch one.
Yeah,
So
one for one.
one for one.
Yeah.
So I do think this is a rich area for the use of artificial intelligence, which is why I hope we have as much incentive and action on using it to counter threats. And that requires, and we talked about this, I think, last time. Yes, we need to advance the use of AI without retarding it too much with overregulation, but security has to be one of the uses because of the volumetric issues surrounding the kinds of attacks that can be mounted. And even though this is humans, digital escorts, the signatures are going to be volumetrically much different and harder for a human to be able to see.
What's your reaction from Microsoft being the company involved? I mean, they're a global leader. They're the second $4 trillion company as of last week. What's the impact from their brand and their credibility on this topic?
I think they're almost too big to fail. I think you asked me a great question, and I can't remember whether I answered it well about what would I tell Jensen at NVIDIA, the NVIDIA CEO, and I would say the same thing to Satya Nadella, who is a really thoughtful leader at Microsoft, is you need to keep feeling the weight of responsibility. Just your distribution alone means that when you're not good enough, the potential for difficulty is much greater. I don't want to bash Microsoft because it's almost too easy and I don't think it's warranted. There are advantages to using a product like Microsoft because when they find something, they can very quickly put a patch in or have a workaround or find a resolution. But we're going to have this problem over and over again. And the companies themselves have to keep advancing in this area because nothing's happening to stop adversaries from advancing their interests. And we can't wait till something manifests or till the government prescribes it in order for it to be done. So I give the same advice. Feel the weight of responsibility. We are a $4 trillion company. They spend massive amounts on security and have advanced things, but it doesn't matter. You don't get to say, well, that's all I'm going to do. You have to do it till it's done.
Yeah, they're on the front lines, right? Even before the government regulation come in or the government could identify, it's the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act. They're the first ones to observe and orient, and then they can act on it before the government has a chance to then regulate. So lead from the front, guys.
Yep.
They've made significant investment in infrastructure. We've talked about data centers and some of the projects that they're doing there, but it's almost like if we're considering cybersecurity as an infrastructure and there's public funding going to some of that shared risk, they could invest in some of that infrastructure as well to help keep themselves and the national security interests like you talked about.
And remember, I'm such a broken record on this, Eric. To an adversary or competitor, every node is target or transportation. Cyber attackers are fundamentally lazy. It might be really hard to get into a protected system. It might be easier to get in through an unprotected system. We have so many homegrown on-prem security solutions tended by under-resourced technical staffs that are part of our critical infrastructure, whether they know it or not, that I think we have to address. It's why the cloud is so attractive, even though the cloud isn't a panacea. It's just because having 1,000 one-offs, no, it's much bigger than that, tens of thousands of one-offs just creates too many opportunities for adversaries, competitors to get in. I alluded to this, but here's my big proposal. Help me, Mr. Historian. When did Ike do the U.S. interstate system?
The transcontinental superhighway actually was started in the 30s by FDR. It was designed to be a Great Depression project. It's like, I think, New Deal and investment. And so 1938 was the Federal Aid Highway Act, designed to make a 6-route toll network, but it kind of petered out as World War II took off. The Federal Interstate Highway System, as we know it today, was signed into law by Ike June 29th, 1956, which authorized $25 billion over 13 years for the construction of 41,000 miles of interstate. And it also created a highway trust fund, gasoline tax increasing from 2 cents to 3 cents per gallon. And then there's additional taxes on tires, trucks, and buses.
I know I liked his proposal for a reason. It was started on my brother's 2nd birthday and the year my sister was born. So, an auspicious year. I do like Ike. This is a very governmental problem. Remember, things that are really big, that require deep pockets and long time horizons. I would take some of my $4 trillion U.S. companies that have benefited from the security environment provided by the investment the American people make in national security. I would say, you're going to participate with us, and we are going to use this as a technical infrastructure to connect all of the United States and her interests. We're going to use it as an education infrastructure to get rid of some of our health disparities and educational disparities. It can be an area for cybersecurity because we'll have a single approach in terms of how we do it. It can be an element of talent development when you choose to put your nodes of your digital highway system where you put it in terms of reaching out to some of our talented but underreached populations. And the companies are going to do well here as well because of the industries that are going to grow up around it. I think it's something that the time has come. I have a hard time with President Trump's statements about how much money we're taking in via tariffs. But if we're actually took in $27 billion in July alone, let's put it against something good. You can pay for it like Ike did.
Yeah, and if you're deliberate about it from the outset, the interstate system ended up dividing a lot of communities and significant development on one side of the tracks versus the other, and you created some inadvertent disparities. And in some places, deliberate disparities, right? There was some deliberate segregation with where some of the roads went. You could be a little bit more deliberate on that and really make this an infrastructure project that benefits and has far-reaching impact, second and third order effects of infrastructure investment in those areas that are maybe underserved or underutilized.
Make it your first huge bipartisan effort, right?
Let's do it.
This is an area where America has spoken very clearly about the issues they have with the disparities in society. No further definition. So let's make this be the one that is bipartisan to address the issues on all sides of that. I think it's something that the time has come. I think we could do it. I think that a candidate that puts this forward in a meaningful way with enough resources and plan behind it, not just an executive order that says we're going to do it and then calls it done. I think it's an idea that's time has come, and I think we could actually fund it within the fiscal constraints that we have currently. So let's do it, Eric.
Start working some legislation after this.
All right. In our spare time.
Yeah. All right, we'll continue on.
It's my platform for my candidacy for presidency. Just let me get rid of a couple other issues in my life.
A few other things you got going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, we'll move on to this idea of dismantling the government. So in the last week, President Trump dismissed the Bureau of Labor Statistics Commissioner, Dr. Erica McIntyre, after a weak July jobs report, and the Army ordered rescission of Jen Easterly's academic appointment to West Point, where she was to be the Robert F. McDermott Distinguished Chair in the Department of Social Sciences, which is not a full-time teaching position, and any costs incurred will not be paid by West Point. Easterly, if you don't know, is the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, CISA, and a 1990 United States Military Academy graduate. She's seemingly solid, done a lot of work in cybersecurity, but critics warn that this will erode institutional integrity and longstanding partisan civil service norms. In the case of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, she was confirmed as BLS Commissioner in January 2024 with a bipartisan 86-8 Senate vote. It wasn't a voice vote like yours, Sue, typically used when the matter is non-controversial or expected to pass easily, and there's usually bipartisan support.
100%,
I'm
baby.
guessing that some of the senators wanted a recorded vote for the record. But 86-8, not too bad. Among the Republican senators who voted to confirm her include then Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio and then Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. We know those guys. These personnel decisions risk lasting harm to agency credibility. They demoralize career professionals, and they cast doubt on the signals government sends to markets. So, especially amid tariff-induced pressure that fuels cost-cutting via layoffs rather than sustainable reforms. Sue, what are your thoughts on these two firings or revokings?
Well, so the whole trend of firing career civil servants who became political appointees because the area they were working in was one of expertise, not just of policy, is so massively wrongheaded. And these are just the two latest ones. I'll throw Chris Krebs, Jen's predecessor at CISA, who is under attack. Then we can go to the military with the number of generals and admirals who have been let go for some non-specific reason. We cannot continue to throw away half our talent with each election. There is an expertise to some of the disciplines we have. I'm in favor of political appointees that carry any new president's policies to say these are the policies that the American people have said they wanted. But they have to be affected by people who actually know the craft. I've said this before. The reason why we don't have 90 deals in 90 days is there's just no one to do them.
Yeah, it's physics.
Right? It's just there's no one to do it. And the president, let's say he's the most amazing, talented person in the world, he's going to be able to do 1,000th of 1% of the number of decisions that need to be made in order for the nation and given our place in the world to act reasonably. So it's just wrongheaded. It is antithetical even to the president's stated objectives, which makes me wonder whether he really has those objectives, and that's to actually do something. We mentioned DOGE earlier. Bring some people in that know how to look at a budget with the mandate to make it smaller and identify those things that are no longer valid in this environment. Man, now you're getting somewhere. So it is wrongheaded. And again, it is not exclusive. It is extreme with this administration, but it is not exclusive. The Biden administration wouldn't touch a Trump appointee, right? I want expertise. And again, American people, come on. As my daughter would say, develop some ridges in your brain. The likelihood that an individual who has spent her career doing what she believed was important would purposely harm the United States in order to get back at this version of a president, it just makes no sense. So are there methodological things you might question about how the Bureau of Labor and Statistics works? Maybe. But the likelihood that this is happening, and when you get rid of all the expertise, the erosion in trust globally will come back to haunt us in massive ways. And don't be messing with our financial systems. I just think this is super problematic, but it isn't the only case.
Yeah, so some of the drama that surrounds the numbers, the change in total non-farm payroll employment for May was revised down. So they put out these numbers every month, but then they go back the past couple months because there's been delays in reporting from companies and things like that. And the estimates were lower. That's what really irked the president. At least that's the truth he put out, or reduced by 125,000 from 144,000 to 19,000. And the change from June was revised down from 147,000 to 14,000. So those are pretty significant drops. Unemployment, which is a different measurement, rose for the first time since March to 4.2%. And so break this down a little bit. Non-farm payroll, that's how many jobs employers are adding or cutting in the given month. The unemployment rate is how many people who want jobs can't find one. So they could be correlated, but maybe not. And they're definitely not causal. So they're two separate surveys. Think businesses versus households, and they measure different things: job creation by businesses or job seekers out there in the market. They often move together, but don't have to. And I think this is overall indicative of the Q2 earnings and uncertainty from tariffs. The fastest way to cut operational costs in a company is to fire people or reduce hiring. We haven't seen necessarily all these impacts on tariffs influencing prices just yet, but the first hit came in the Q2 reportings from a lot of these companies in terms of their share price. General Motors, for example, disclosed a net $1.1 billion in tariff impact. Ford is expecting at the end of the year about $3 billion headwind. Harley Davidson reported a $13 million cost in Q2 directly related to tariffs. And there's a number of technology companies, including Scholastica, which stated, quote, substantially all tariffs paid by Scholastica are expected to be recovered from our customers. So we haven't seen it roll forward just yet, but it will be coming. I don't know if Dr. McIntarfer was good at her job or not. The point I want to make, though, is that data can be framed and used in different ways. So that 4.2% unemployment number I used earlier, Sue, that ties the highest percentage since October 2021. So 4.2%. Should the sky be falling? Do we need to worry about the economy? Are things a disaster? Or I could also tell you that's the mode from that same period, or the value that appears most frequently in that data set of monthly unemployment from October of 2021 till now, 4.2%. 7 other months saw that same high value. The average was 3.85%, so it's on the higher side over the period, but the range was only 3.4% to 4.2%. And I say all that to say that framing of this data is not new. You can take the statistics and you can cry from the rooftops that it's a disaster because we're 4.2%, or you can say, hey, we're on the high side, but we're roughly where we've been over the past couple years. The sky is not falling. In that case, everyone's playing with the same trusted tools. They're using the same numbers and they're just spinning them differently, but there's no cause for concern within the number itself. The information and the data is credible. Businesses write long-term contracts tied to this inflation data. The Federal Reserve uses it to make their decisions on interest rates. And Social Security benefits are adjusted based on the Consumer Price Index, which is another thing that comes out of the BLS. So the biggest concern here I have is that it undermines that shared trust that you're talking about. And even the perception of politicized numbers has huge ramifications and impacts, not just domestically, but in the international markets.
So agree with the point about numbers can be used to prove any point, right? They can. It's as old as time, but you still have to have the same numbers. There is a check and balance to it too. Eric, you and I both work for the government. We are not naive about areas where the government needs to improve. I believe in data and data explainability and data understanding and data analytics. We are still way too manual, and we have invested way too little in the kinds of systems that will help us have better dashboards in order to do it. This is not a blanket endorsement of the numbers themselves. But here's where I have a problem. President Trump, when he said it, he said, I've had a problem with her since the election when she produced really, really beneficial numbers right before the election, revised upwards to benefit Kamala Harris. That's what he cited. Do you know that on the day of the Democratic convention, with the number that he cites as evidence of a revision then, the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually decreased that jobs report in March downward by 818,000 on the day that would do her the most harm as she walked into her convention.
818. We were only talking about 144
I
here.
know. I know.
Dang.
Right? Dang. Right? So the problem is deal with the numbers, deal with the methodology, make it better, make it more responsive, make government better. Government isn't good enough. but eroding the trust in the intentionality of the institutions and the humans is way more destructive than 5 different perspectives on the same number.
I think it's also important to remember that we're talking about numbers here, but every one of those 144,000 people
Is a
is a
human.
job and a family and somebody trying to make it. Every one of those 4.2% of people is trying to make a living. And if you've ever filed for unemployment or not sure where your next job or paycheck's come from, you know full well what that feels like and how much that uncertainty is. And I'm not trying to minimize that by any means,
Not at all.
but saying that the numbers need to be true and you need to have confidence in the numbers in order to make additional decisions.
And it's not about whether we feel good about ourselves or not good about ourselves. It's whether we have the data we need in order to make decisions that are better for the American people. I'm really glad you brought up the human cost. We had a government shutdown for, I think it was like 2.5 weeks. I was senior. I mean, I made a good living. Being without a paycheck for one pay period, I felt it. So did 70% of the people that work. This is not small stuff. And again, I think this is what the American people agree is something that we need to do better. Now we just get to agree on real solutions that will get at it.
Moving to our predictions for next week. So the Commanders are still the Commanders.
Okay,
We've
how
talked
long
about
how
Rosie
long
O'Donnell.
are you gonna milk that?
Just for 1 week. Just 1 week. I'll have a national security prediction here. What did you have last week?
I think I'm gonna do the same thing I just accused you of doing. The former president, Obama, is still roaming free. No, just stop it, y'all. It's never gonna happen. America, let's move on to something else. I think that was my prediction. I do have a new prediction, though.
Yeah, what are you watching?
I think for America, in light of the Ukraine-Russia conversation I think August 8th is the deadline that President Trump put forward if Russia hasn't made meaningful progress towards some sort of seriousness of purpose when it comes to negotiating with Ukraine. He would impose massive sanctions. I think that's a date worth watching. So what's my prediction? No, he won't. He won't do anything on that day.
You don't think we'll have additional sanctions? It's primarily secondary sanctions on folks who are selling stuff too. So like we put additional sanctions on India for buying their oil.
Yep. I think my first is that's an event to watch because it will say if we're trending in the right direction or whether my fears will come true that we always back off when Putin pushes us. But if he does continue the press, I think that's a super good thing. So watch this channel.
Yeah, I think we'll see movement in Ukraine before we see significant movement in Israel, Gaza. The 8th is the end of this week. I think Trump's frustrated that he's finally starting to realize he's being played by Putin. And a new international development also starts to pull back a little bit of the Epstein headlines.
So I just say, having served as his principal deputy, he is very different in this administration than he was in the first. But there are areas where he isn't the caricature that he's being portrayed. And I will say that he, despite the cruelty of some of his policies and some of his statements that we see, and it's almost cognitive dissonance for me, he really does hate human suffering. I don't think he is being disingenuous when the human toll of all these crises he finds abhorrent. Now, whether he has the wherewithal or the intention to effect it, he is getting frustrated. I think he's getting frustrated with Bibi. The problem is these are very knotty, Knotty issues when it comes to other interests he has in terms of shared power structure. Listeners are going to say, no way. And I will say no person that can be as cruel as I've seen his policies be could possibly be this way. But I do think it is an area that really does motivate him to want to act. Whether it motivates him to act in a way that costs him anything in power, I think too early to tell.
You're saying there's a chance.
I always believe there's a pony. It's why you love me.
That's what we're watching. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
Thank you for joining us. As always, remember, we're here for you. Look for a link to the show notes to provide feedback. or suggest topics for the next time. I'm told that feedback is a gift, and Eric and I both believe it because we give each other feedback a lot. Join us next week for the Understandable Insights podcast, wherever you listen. And as always, go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another.